Take it away, Loretta.
Okay, glad to see so many friends and then new people that I haven't met before. I will be using some slides and all the background that Alice shared about me. It isn't really how I come to know what I'm going to talk about tonight. How I come to know what I'm talking about tonight is the School of Hard Knocks. Going through working with my experiences with the county. Primarily, I'm a citizen of the city of Olympia as well, and have also worked with the city of Olympia, but working with the Thurston County, trying to make change in our farmlands for the benefit of farms and farmland. So let me pull up my slides here. Take a second to do that, and actually there, I'm sure you can see them there, and I really would like to, if I can, no, that's all right, we'll do it this way. And as Alice said, she's going to put a way for you to actually download and then perhaps print out the slides if you want to take notes on that. But anyway, you'll be able to get a hold of them. I'm really talking about, oh, as I talk, can you see my cursor as I move it around? Excellent, because then I can have some animation for you here. I'm really talking about 3 different topics, but most of my time is going to be on this first one, which is the visions, goals, and regulations, the comprehensive plan and the development code at the cities and the counties. But I also will talk a bit about the permit process on specific projects. The comprehensive plan is not specific projects. It's much a higher level of looking at the issues than that. And just one slide on the budget cycle. And I'm going to use Thurston County as my example. And it's similar, but not exactly the same ever. There are people involved in this, and they all make different decisions about how they're going to proceed, but similar processes, some of which are required by state law, and that's what gives it the similarity. So I'm wanting to know, first of all, a little bit about all of you in terms of which parts of my little matrices here you are involved in. At the top, the blue things are all things that have to do with the Growth Management Act and the comprehensive plan, essentially. And then the green things are activities that relate to specific projects, as well as local plans. And local plans includes things about bikes, things about trees, things about housing that are managed outside of the comprehensive plan. Sometimes they become an appendage to the comprehensive plan, but there are plans that are managed entirely outside of the process that I'm talking about today, though they tend to follow some similarities as you go through them. And there is this quasi-judicial aspect where you're having some either person and hearing officer, if it's here, or up here, the Growth Management Hearings Board, listen to an argument that the decision that has been made is inconsistent with the rules that are there to be made, and is quasi-judicial because it is operating somewhat like a court, but they are not, it's not a court and it's not a judge. So which ones of these, let's see, if people can just, let's see, you can't see each other. Maybe Alice, if you make my window a little of the screen share a little bit smaller and we get to see more of each other, will that allow us to see more people?
Everyone has to do that on their own screen by just dragging.
Okay.
Loretta, if you want to know what people have been involved in, I would suggest that we ask folks to just drop it in the chat and we can kind of read them out.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you for thinking of that as how to do this thing. So which of these activities have each of you been involved in? You've maybe written a comment because that was happening, the policies and code or the permit, or you've made an appeal. What has been your experience?
Madeline says, send comments to hearings examiner, comments to planning commission. Sarah says, for me, this is all pretty new. I've submitted comments pretty much when someone else gave me talking points. So this is all new to me. Charlotte says, all but hearing examiner appeals. Christine says, comments to planning commission and city council. Nancy says, comments to and testimony to board of county commissioners and city. Peggy says, written comments to commissioners. Julie sent a few comments, but haven't been active. Lisa, I sent comments and spoke to city council. Lisa Cezanne, comments to board of county commissioners and planning commission.
How about some of you have spoken informally with either the council members or the board of county commissioners? Yeah, the shorelines now. So there's Dave Peeler has there about shorelines. There's a shoreline management program. That's one of those programs that's outside of the comprehensive plan, and is very similar in its structure and approach to the comprehensive plan, with a lot of state rules about it.
We also have a few folks saying they have spoken to city council or to board of county commissioners informally.
Right. Okay. Perfect. All right. That gets me started. I'm going to, those of you who have been using other people's talking points, I'm going to try to encourage you to think about becoming the people who write talking points to comment from time to time. So I'm going to go into more detail, starting with the first aspect of detail I'm going to do is compare the difference between, this is on the comprehensive plan. I'm going to use the comprehensive plan as the place to start, and then at the end I'll do the other two topics. The difference between annual amendments and periodic updates. Oh my goodness, it took me forever to figure out which was which and which is it. Annual amendments occur annually, except in the county. They're currently happening on a 2-year cycle instead of annually. And the periodic update is something required by the Growth Management Act to be done. It's been required every 8 years. I believe the bill is going to pass. That's going to change that to every 10 years. And it is a big deal. It takes all kinds of work to do. The annual amendments we're in the middle of. Everybody, all jurisdictions are in the middle of right now. Most cities have very few annual amendments. The county has very many. So I'll be talking about the county's process.
I'm just going to interject quickly. We have some folks asking if you could make it bigger. Is it possible to go into the slideshow settings so that
yeah, if I could only get to the top of my
if you go to slideshow there at the top.
Right, but I can't. I'll have to. I don't know. I've got something. Some of the controls for. Well, let me see what I can do here.
You could also maybe zoom in the bottom right corner. The little plus sign next to the 77 on the other side. Yeah, there you go.
This particular circle I'm going to show in a bigger form in just a moment.
Great.
But that helped a bit, I think. Is that right? and that helps. Okay, so I will get to this one in a moment, and it'll be bigger. The periodic update is a vision for 20 all the way to 2040, and you're supposed to theoretically consider the entire plan at one time. Believe me, no one, probably even the person in charge at each jurisdiction is probably able to do that, but that's the theory. Both of these two processes end up changing our comprehensive plan. So that's why I'm going to be talking about the comprehensive plan, because they influence, that's the next step. These annual amendments, as I said, we're in the midst of them right at this very minute. And at the county, we had, and most everybody has a deadline to submit if you're going to do amendments by November. And then the board looks at them for a little bit and sets up a comment period. It's a written comment period that ended about 2 weeks ago. And today, the Board of County Commissioners did a work session and reviewed them. And they're just trying to determine, should this be on our work plan for the staff to work on this coming 2 years? Should it be dropped entirely, or should it be considered again 2 years from now when we go through? And they only got halfway through their list of 36 items that they're trying to work on, when they only have enough staff to work on about 5 each year. So 2 years, 10, maybe 15, depending on the size. So pretty soon they're going to decide on their list and their priorities, and then that'll be reviewed by the Planning Commission, and then staff will start working on the ones with the highest priorities. If necessary, they'll create stakeholder groups, surveys, all kinds of things. You can be involved. They will actually set up a web page for every single amendment at the county. I'm not sure if the cities do that, but if not, I encourage you, if you're working with the city, to recommend that they do that. It's very nice to be able to follow along, because then it shows what's going to happen next and what's already happened. And then items for consideration, and I'll go through more detail about how the items on the next screen go through these two processes of going through the Planning Commission, then to the Board of County Commissioners, making a decision, and then the whole submission starts. And things that don't get done in the 2-year cycle at the county can be considered for the next 2-year cycle. That's the whole process. At the cities, it probably is, if they don't get done this year, they can be considered again for the next year. But there is a logic to having this process. It's called the docketing process, in that then we all know what's going to be the work for the next 2 years. In this case, we'll know what we're going to be working on. And these items, because they're part of the comprehensive plan, they're rewrites of a whole chapter, sometimes of codes, rewrites of sections of chapters. They're done, they include citizens' requests and their development updates. Development code updates also happen at the same time, should be happening at the same time. It's part of the process. Well, let's look at what's happening a little bit more in detail. As once the list is done, you got a list. So now everybody's starting to work. Individual large projects may have what's called a scoping discussion to figure out, well, how big decision makers, elected officials, do you really want this to be? And they'll have a stakeholder group or groups. But other projects might go through quickly. I've seen things on the comp plan list, the docket, take 2.5 months. That's very quick. I've seen things that won't be done in 4 years. So each individual item will take a different amount of time. There is some way at the board meeting today, if you get a copy of the materials that were in the work session, which you can get on the website of the Board of County Commissioners, it will tell how much time they think it's going to take and which year they think they're going to work on it, or years they think that the staff is going to work on them if they are put on the agenda. So you can get some idea of how big of a deal each one of these are. So what's happening here is you start out by getting some talking points that you can start sharing at the planning commissions before the staff has even presented some things. So you know what's going to come up. You know it's going to come up 2 meetings from now or pretty soon, and you got your big picture ideas. You're just talking at a very high level about some key things that you want the planning commission to be paying attention to when it does come up. Eventually, there's a staff briefing that's followed by a public hearing, which is a time to both write and speak. And I'm going to say write and speak, both. The written word is really important because if you ever want to make an appeal, you're going to have written the things about this particular proposal that you're appealing on. And they should reference the Growth Management Act, your comprehensive plan, and community needs. You're going to want to attend when the staff does their, the staff will do some meetings. There's several different meetings going on at the Planning Commission. And note that the Planning Commission is just a recommending board. There's citizens volunteering. I take my hat off to those citizens volunteering on Planning Commission. And some of you have done that in this group probably. I salute you. Now, when it finally moves over to the Board of County Commissioners, even if the Planning Commission says, we don't like this idea, we shouldn't go forward, the Board of County Commissioners or the City Council is going to take up the issue anyway and take into consideration what the Planning Commission said, along with everything else. But the staff will do a briefing. You should download that staff document because it'll have useful information in it for you to do your next step, which is to comment in writing, providing at this particular point in time, this writing right here is where you can provide a lot of detail. I think of myself in this Planning Commission time as getting my ideas together to really think through how can I communicate this effectively? What points are going to make a difference here, and get those comments in this particular in detail here at the Board of County Commissioners, because I've had some time now to work my ideas through in my head and with other people to be able to communicate there. Read the comments that other people are making here and back at the Planning Commission too, because you'll see why the people who are supporting this idea support it. You'll see why other people who oppose it. And whether you're supporting or opposing, you'll get a better way of how to make your case. Speak at the public hearing, and then eventually you're going to be attending a briefing at the end that shows what happened to the public input, what the public input was about, and getting ready for the Board of County Commissioners to vote. And you should read all of that material too. And of course, at this particular time here, you're going to want to, at the end of this process, is when you may need to be talking individually, if you haven't already, with your county commissioners or your council members. So I'm going to switch here to some big picture ideas about the comprehensive plan. But right here at this particular point, are there questions out there for me? Yes, Dave has his hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Loretta. I wondered about your comment you just made about speaking to our commissioner, county commissioner, during this process, because I've heard sometimes that they don't want people to talk to them, outside of the hearings and testimony in front of the commission and that sort of thing. They just don't necessarily encourage that. But what are your thoughts about that?
I think early in the process, it can even be before, while it's moving from the Planning Commission to the Board of County Commissioners, is to have a conversation with the one-on-one with the Board of County Commissioners. If you have a proposal that you think is going to take that kind of action, otherwise use your written materials and the fact that you're speaking at the public hearing to handle that. And when you're having this conversation, it really should be connecting this one particular action. It should be connecting it to the broader issues that that commissioner is concerned about. So you're trying to connect it to their interests.
Yeah, and I will say that in at least in my experience, when I have talked to a county commissioner outside of the, you know, the sort of the public process they have, it's more or less to let them know I have a concern about this aspect. I will be providing testimony about that, you know, because I just feel like that's the more effective way. Let them know you're interested and you're going to do something, and you know, you have comments, but I don't think they really want to hear a bunch of detail outside the process, because it's not really entered into the public, you know, sphere in that way. So
right. So before their staff briefing is probably the first staff briefing, because from that moment on, everything that you write to them will go into the public process.
And Loretta, you have one more question in the chat as well.
Okay. And that's volunteer committee members. Well, the Planning Commission itself is appointed by the elected officials. And that is the place where I was speaking about the volunteer. That Planning Commission members are all volunteers. They are not elected officials, and they receive no pay for anything that they're doing there. And you get on the Planning Commission by submitting an application to the council or to the Board of County Commissioners to seek a place on the Planning Commission. There's only so many members that have to be of this kind and that kind. And so there's not always vacancies. I believe we're pretty close to full, maybe have one slot left on the county's Planning Commission. Just filled some positions just recently. Okay, I'm gonna kind of zoom out for a minute here to what does the comprehensive plan look like and the vision? And there's some words here from the Growth Management Act about it being the centerpiece of local planning and that sort of thing. In addition to the plan itself, which has each one of these chapters, see the chapters that are in the county's comprehensive plan. Each one of the chapters has a narrative, and then it has specific goals and specific policies related to that narrative. And they all look like this. They include those components. They'll have different chapters because cities are structured to have different chapters than the county is. And counties will have different, they could lump some of these things together in different ways. If you look at other counties, they won't look exactly like this, but you'll see that same structure: narrative, goals, policies. And while they're working on the changes in the comprehensive plan at any one time, they're also looking at the development regulations. And those are to be in conformity with the comprehensive plan. That's a requirement of the Growth Management Act. And they should really be done at the same time. Sometimes staff will do the comprehensive plan, and then the month after it's approved, they will update all of the development codes, but citizens should be involved in the development code regulations as well, because that's really what counts when you go for a permit, is what's in the development code. I didn't mean to go back that far. My last point, as I had down there, is that the county puts their rules, their codes in the municipal code item. And you can, when you get your copy of this, you can click on that and go right to our municipal codes for the county. That takes a lot of looking at to understand where things are in that, but you'll get the hang of it if you use it a lot. There's a little bit of history about the comprehensive plan in our county. And we actually had a plan. We had a plan. We also had the Regional Planning Council. I put that on there because they're in yellow here, because sometimes they do the part of the work for everybody. And so we need to know about them. But we had a comprehensive plan before the Growth Management Act was passed in 1990. And part of the reason I'm even having this session here today is because when many of us were young and going to school, there was no Growth Management Act, or you didn't grow up in the state of Washington. And so your state doesn't even have a Growth Management Act right now. You have growth by permit. Whoever submits a permit, and whether it gets approved or not, that determines how things grow. Urban small sprawl is what happens as a result, and that's why we have a Growth Management Act. So we have only had that since 1990, and of course it took about a decade before anything actually really happened using under the Growth Management Act. And so it's fairly new. So most of us haven't had training, like we've had training on how to, write to our legislators and how to listen to the hearings or attend hearings at the legislative session, how to vote. We know how to do that, and how to consider our candidates. But we haven't had training in the Growth Management Act, and it's about time that we did. We really all need that. Those are some of the other things that are happening in our county leading up to where we are right now. This is the timeline for things. Oh, and this looks way too fast because this is 2 years of time of activity in order to do the periodic update. Do you see, Alice, that we've got some people in the waiting room? There's a vision. The periodic update starts soon. It starts very soon. When I talked to Maya Teeple, who is the head of it at the county, planning staff member, she told me that if we want to get scoping ideas in, which means scoping means setting the boundaries for what can be included. If we want to get those ideas in, we need to get them in August and September of this year, which is ahead of the actual beginning of work on the comprehensive plan. The county commissioners will, by sometime in fall, might be late fall, set the scope, and then staff have to operate within that. So if we want to have climate change in the form that's in the Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan, in our county's comprehensive plan, in our city's comprehensive plan, we need to ask for that in the scoping process. I mean, it's very informal. We need to ask for that informally to the staff. We can ask for the staff and ask for our commissioners as well, talk directly to them. There is no formal review. There's no input process on scoping. As big as and important as this is, we simply have to take the initiative and have one-on-one conversations with both the staff and the commissioners, with the staff and the council members on the scope. Much of what has to be done by state law, but we can go beyond state law, and we may very well want to go beyond state law as we update our comprehensive plan. Let's see, are there more questions there in the chat? No, I guess not. Okay. So there will be a community engagement plan, and I think we also want to comment on that community engagement plan. A particular thing I want to comment on, I never commented on a community engagement plan before, but this year I'm going to, and that is the need to make the process inclusive of the racial and ethnic diversity of our community. And that means things can't be done the way they were done the last time, because that did not do that. I think it means a very different kind of outreach. All of our, most of our cities and the county have a racial equity group or an equity group. And I think they need to be involved in figuring out that community engagement plan this time around. And everybody, we could all comment on that particular issue. Then they'll start work in 2023. The city of Olympia is going to start this fall, actually. And they will go chapter by chapter, or sometimes bigger topics than chapters, because there's information in one chapter. I mean, the same subject is covered in multiple chapters. But anyway, they'll divvy it up and have a kind of a plan for when things happen. And it'll go along in over a 2-year period, where if you want to be engaged in this, we're committing ourselves for a long haul here, because this is a big deal. This is the vision for 2045, and it isn't going to happen again for 10 more years. And then later on, the development code will be done. And as I said, sometimes it's happened the same time, and sometimes it actually happens after this dot here. Dave, yes, your question.
Thanks, Loretta. Actually, I was going to point out a question that somebody else had put in the chat, and that was about if you happen to live within the urban growth area, so you're not in the city, but you're also treated by the county as though you're sort of subject to the city, because, you know, anyway, and it feels kind of like if you're in that area, in the urban growth area that's not yet within the city limits, you're kind of in a no man's land in terms of, you know, what's happening. Can you talk about that a little bit, and who's really in, maybe who's making the policies and that sort of thing?
The policies in the urban growth area are done by the county, but the city creates an agreement with the county. It is a plan it's actually on the docket for this coming year. It will be put on the docket for this coming year. The Board of County Commissioners talked about it this afternoon, and they're going to put it on there for sure. To together talk about what needs to be done in that area. But the urban growth area is in the county's comprehensive plan. It's described what should be happening there. The rules about land use, though, the different kinds of land uses that are possible there are under the county's code. So they're in the county codes. But the city has a lot of input on it. So you're actually in 2 places at once. And even if you live in a city, the county's comprehensive plan influences your life, because it influences what's happening in all of the rural county. It also has a chapter on health that is related to every single one of us. They're the health authority for the entire county. So we all need to be involved in the county, even if we live in a city.
Yeah, Loretta, one thing I've noticed, at least in our area where we're just south of Tumwater, is that in the urban growth area here, you know, a lot of that growth happens because the city of Tumwater will extend services, you know, into that area for certain kinds of development. And so there is a city working relationship directly with some of that development, even though they're still subject to county, you know, permit policies and so on.
Right. And the plan of an urban growth area is that eventually it's only supposed to be as big as could eventually be filled by the growth of the city. So you have some idea of how big the city's going to get in terms of population. And it's supposed to be definitely enough space there to fill it so that people could fill it in, that it wouldn't be too full by 2045, that it can accommodate 2045. Now, our cities and our counties have agreed that we don't want to use that space up that fast, because we want to grow up and more dense at the center, at the transportation corridors and that sort of thing. So everybody's agreeing that the existing urban corridors do not need to be expanded in any way, that they're plenty big. To my knowledge, nobody's decided that they should be pulled back in any way at this particular point in time. It's kind of like just right, people are saying. Okay, any other questions on this? This is the big work. And I'm going to try to entice you to want to engage in this big work, because it's important to our futures. Every comprehensive plan has required elements. This is Growth Management Act requirements, and elements means chapters, although nobody has to organize them quite in chapters. They can do it in a different way. But it must have a land use area, it must have a housing area, and a bill that passed last year. And if it gets funded, which it looks like it's going to, 1220, this will be updated and have new requirements in it. And the new requirements particularly relate to not just thinking about how much housing you have, and not just thinking about whether it's affordable or not, but thinking about how much housing you have to meet. I think there's 4 different levels of affordability. So thinking very minutely about, so where will people who are really low income going to live, and then the next lowest income and the next lowest income. And also you must also plan, according to that bill that passed last year, plan to have areas that would allow for shelters, plan for shelters. Know that in 2045, we are still going to need shelters. And so you plan for it. And that sort of thing, you have to plan for all of that. The utilities, the transportation, and there they use levels of service. That's what LOS stands for, of how much service you have. The capital facilities like the schools and waste management and airports, and there's like mental inpatient facilities. There's a bunch of other things that have to go in there that have to be planned for by everybody. And then in the counties, there's a whole rural area analysis, and it's not in the cities. Then there's some optional things as well, including the sub-area plans. And sometimes in the cities, the sub-area planning work is done outside of the comprehensive plan, but it can be done within the comprehensive plan. And that's where the UGAs then go as an optional area, and it is in our county's Growth Management Act. It actually gets stuck in the land use chapter. Okay, let me go to the next one here. Oh yeah, which of these are an interest of yours? Can you put that in the chat? Is if you were to work, if I can entice you and you wanted to get involved in these. I put climate change on here because House Bill 1099 was written that way and is heading towards passage. Although at the very end, this always happens in the legislature, doesn't it? In the Senate Ways and Means, they took the word climate change out and left it at resilience, resiliency. And so there's a hope that when it goes between the House and the Senate, eventually it will get climate change back in there. But the concept is still in there. So put in the chat if you want to be, if you would work on any of these areas, or what would interest you to work on and know about. And right now, nobody's putting anything in the chat, so I'm not doing a very good sales job. Please think about what's in there. That the in our various land use that's where agriculture goes, agriculture, minerals, and the environment goes into the conservation section. Actually in the county, it's parks, recreation, conservation gets all stuck together into one. That's where the environment things go. Okay, so we're getting some interests here. Yeah, you're not surprising me. Housing one is really, there's plenty more to work on in terms of farmland, and so I will be working on those as we do this periodic update. But housing also interests me because I think we really have to push the envelope on that topic. And that solar how can we do solar on agriculture land and not reduce the amount of land in agriculture? That one interests me. Okay. So, as I said, many of us have not engaged in and not had any education on the comprehensive plan because it is 1990 is a long time ago, but it is really new, like compared to all the other ways that we engage in our civic life. It is new. And I would love to see us in this community have 3 sessions in the next few months that get us going on this. One is in July, just from the people who really know about this stuff. What is the Growth Management Act? Much more fluid conversation than I'm giving you tonight on the Growth Management Act and the Comprehensive Plan. And since at this particular moment in time, we don't know exactly how much money will be in the budget, and we don't know exactly what bills will be changed, will be passed, to give us that update. We will definitely know that by July. And then in August, have our local planners talk about their community engagement forum plans, how they want us to be engaged, and let us help shape those engagement plans. And then a year from right now, to have our commissioners and our council members, or a commissioner and a council member from each of our jurisdictions, give us the 30,000 foot level. What do they see happening? Because they will already have gone through a scoping process. So they will be able to say, here's the things we want to see changed and updated. This is the new vision we have that we should come out of this 2-year process. We're putting a lot of staff time into this, and this is what we want to see come out of it. So that's my hope for our learning. And I also want to advocate that all of us get involved in helping with the scoping work this fall. Lynn, please go ahead and ask your question.
So I'm wondering.
Just, I can't really hear you, Lynn.
Is that any better?
Oh, that's much better.
Okay. I'm wondering with things that are unexpected, like, so the pandemic would be an example. When they've got themselves all scheduled up like this and everything's planned out for years and years, how do they work in things that they didn't expect?
Well, what I'm talking about here is really the planner's vision of how beautifully decisions can be made. The comprehensive plan is a planner's vision about how we can go about doing things. And it does include public involvement all the way through it. When it's clear that when crisis comes and there's a response, some of that public involvement goes out the window and it's not there at the same amount at all that it was before. And instead, what you're basically getting is the best decisions that people can make, and they do it in a different way.
I'm not even really talking about the public involvement part of it. I'm wondering how they can be flexible enough. You know, it seems to me like they're kind of very lockstep with this planning process.
And this is a planning process, so it's designed to talk about what are we aiming for into our future, to think about what the future is, and then what kind of regulations do we need to get there. When you're dealing with a crisis, you're trying to deal with what's happening at this particular moment in time and being responsive to this. You're not really planning for the future. So it's apples and oranges, really. And it looks that way when you watch what's happening and people happen. So people are bringing a different set of skills and a different approach when they're doing the respond to crisis.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have several other questions. Hard for me to find the hands because there's quite a few people, so just try. Who's got a hand up? And
I just want to say that, you know, when we had COVID, one thing that happened was that for the counties that were in the middle of this process, the legislature gave them more time. They moved their deadlines by at least 1 year. So there is some flexibility in here. It doesn't look very flexible, but I think there is some way to have some flexibility.
and of course, as I said, like the county always has more on the annual updates to the comprehensive plan. On the annual update list, they always have more than ever get done by a lot. So it just rolls into the next year is what happens with the county activities. If you want things to happen quickly, it's not this approach that's going to make a difference in the world. This is not a quick process.
So I have a comment. I actually happen to have been, until November, I was renting a room from a guy who worked in the climate action, or the climate division of the Department of Commerce, and he wrote this big document on how to help jurisdictions write their comprehensive plan with the environment in mind. And but so I kind of, you know, I would hear with the whole lockdown and everything, how much harder a lot of that whole process became. But I would encourage, you know, certainly every jurisdiction should build in, like, the more resiliency we can have in our plan, in our agricultural plan, and everything is going to make it easier for our communities to deal with any crisis. And then I would also suggest, from the people who care about grassroots, that's where we can make faster change than dealing with the things like the comprehensive plan. And we should really encourage our communities, as we're opening back up again, to create resiliency within our communities.
Nice way of putting all of that. Yeah, a couple more hands are up. Just go ahead.
Okay, if I speak?
Please.
I'm a master gardener with Thurston County, and I'm also involved in the Native Plant Society and Native Plant Salvage and Audubon Society and Monarch Butterfly, and I've done this for decades. And it's a way, and I volunteer, and it's a way to teach on the ground level or a grassroots level. And I started with my children in their schools, their friends, my neighborhood, and I do it in my own garden. And then also we're so fortunate to have naturescaping classes. And there's so many things that we could do on a small level, just on our own property, to solve issues of, like, say we have a lot of rain in this area, and to solve water runoff and disease that we have. And if you start creating this ecosystem on your own property, you could see already that the climate changes on a small piece of land.
And that's nice to be able to see, isn't it?
Yes, and if you could do that, then I try to encourage my neighbors. And you see that just the health of the street and the wildlife and the bees, and I know it sounds all, but it, maybe sweet, but scientifically, it really does help communities on a small scale, and then it becomes contagious.
Yep. And this is the opposite side of the issue of thinking about it on the larger scale. How do you think at a landscape level, of the larger landscape level? Yeah. And need to think on both sides. Dave had a comment about who would do these forums. I'm hoping that we can get community engagement, community organizations decide to put together these forums. Each of the counties and the cities do their own the community engagement activity, but it's geared to their own processes as opposed to what in general do we as a go back all the way back to the 101 on the periodic update. It presumes you understand what that is when you go to the community engagement at forums that the counties put together and the planners put together. The planners live this with all of their lives, so they have a little bit of a hard time seeing how far removed from most of us are from the awareness of this process and what difference this process makes in our lives. Okay, I want to make sure that we get to the permits and the budget cycle. So I'm going to just move on. Some other things I'm wishing for is that many of us will have read the plan chapters. And at the very, when you get a copy, when you pick up a copy of this, you'll see that I've got links to all of the chapters, including our smaller cities as well. And you'd study plans from other counties or other cities. You'll see that the chapters look different. An Olympia's chapter, I feel like I can read it. It comes in chunks because you're looking, just the way it's organized, it's chunked up, but it actually reads like a narrative with values. What are our challenges? How do we respond to those challenges? The county's comprehensive plan doesn't look that way at all. There's no storyline in the document. And I'm hoping that we can all kind of talk about what those things that we just said we were interested in and think about what we want in the scoping. And if we read those bills that I talked about, 1099 and 1220 from last year, it'll give you ideas about what you ought to push for. If 1099 passes without the word climate change in it and without the language that was originally in it that relates to climate change, we should ask our own county that we want climate change in there. And we can do that. They can go beyond what's in the state law. We should share scoping ideas in August and September, and that's all done informally. There's no formal process. In 2023, what works is to start drafting narrative language, start drafting goals and policy statements. If you start looking at several different comp plans, you'll see how differently they write the policy statements. And find the ones that you think are strong statements and try to get changes or replicate those strong statement ideas, rather than some of them are very weak with lots of shoulds and no real action. And you can share with the planning staff, stakeholders and other advocates exactly what you're planning. You can have a meeting, a sit-down meeting with the staff in charge of your chapter of the comprehensive plan and just share your narratives. Might not end up in the final document, but it'll start getting thinking that there's community people who believe in this and this and this. Every one of us should be speaking to the Planning Commission several times, the Board of Boards or Councils several times, and write. In order to really make a difference, you have to do both write and speak. And then be engaged in the development code processes as well. That takes a little more mental work to find out how to do development codes right, but you can do that. I know you can. So let me switch from comprehensive plan. Once you got a comprehensive plan, it has development codes, which we all have right now at this very moment. Then people can apply for specific projects that they want to have happen. And most of those specific projects, like if I want to change my garage or something, that's going to go through administrative review. They just check to see that I'm following all the rules and regulations, et cetera, I pay my money, and then on we go. Some things to eventually, some things have to go to the hearing examiner because they're asking for a variance. And there's a form link here. You can see when it goes to the hearing examiner and why. But in order for us to ever appeal any decision that the hearing examiner makes, we have to have made comments all the way through the process from the very beginning, and they must be specifically related to our codes. So if the permit is under review, do comment on it. And if it goes to a quasi-judicial review, do write and be specific about which aspects of the code you think is being violated by this and why that's go back to the comprehensive plan, why you don't want to do that. There's a 14-day appeal timeline for the hearing examiner, and that is the expectation of the legislature, that there be a 14-day appeal process, and people want to change that, but there's very limited circumstances in which you're supposed to, that the jurisdictions can really change that. Have to change the state law. And questions on the permit process before I leave that? Charlotte.
Okay, I would like to talk a little bit about why it's important to be involved in this. Okay, and that is that we've had city council people, staff and county council people and staff say that, for example, the environmental point of view is it's just from a niche interest group. And so if we're really going to have an impact, it's not just you and I individually that have to speak at all these things and write comments and all that. We have to get a large number of people involved so that it doesn't look like just a niche interest. Okay, and that's why this training is important that Loretta is giving us, because it's a complex process, but it's doable. And part of what we have to do is decide at what point we want to raise interest from the other groups we're in to have this input. And that's where the grassroots intersects with this, okay? Like right now, there's a huge outcry for housing because people are so unhappy about the situation with homelessness, right? But so it's not, it has risen to the point where it's not a niche interest. But the environmental stuff that I'm interested in, protection of agricultural land, climate mitigation plan, all of those things, that's not really risen to the top of the political process. And the only way we change that, and I've seen it changed in a couple of places, we get 300 people to comment. All of a sudden, they have to do something. So I'd like to say this is where the intersection is.
Yeah, thank you. That gives me reason to have spent time putting this together. So, yes. The one last thing that I was asked by TCAT to talk about tonight was the budget cycle. Currently, the county is on a 2-year budget cycle. Just 2 years ago, they were on a 1-year budget cycle. And then 4 years before that, they were on a 2-year budget cycle. So that might not last forever, but they are currently on a 2-year budget cycle. And they just did pass the budget. So for 2 years. So now I believe there can be amendments in the process because of course they have to sometimes make changes. And I've asked the county budget person to give me some information about that. And she didn't get back to me by today, but then I only asked her a couple of days ago. So, but that process started in the summer and the fall in the departments. One of the questions I asked the county was, I know that Olympia requests community input in the spring because they use exactly the same cycle of discussions in the departments in the summer and the fall. So they want community input in the spring. And I don't know if the county asks for community input. They did last spring. I didn't notice that myself. And then they have discussions on the budget at briefing sessions and work sessions on the budget in November. And then they have public hearings. They had 8 different hearings covering 7 different parts of the budget, and you could attend the hearing that was relevant to your interest, or you could attend the last hearing, which was relevant to all of the interests. And so there was a lot of room for public involvement at that particular point in time. And then they approved it a little bit later in December. So there wasn't much time between these 2 events, which is a little bit discouraging. At the county level, the budget includes a lot of things that the elected officers are not in charge of. They do get to approve the budget, but they don't have any control over what actually happens. And they really would be very unlikely to disagree with the other elected officials' budget request. I have heard them argue about them and change things, but they don't do it very much. So there are all these other elected officials who put their own part of the budget together, and that's all in, and all of that is included in one single budget that gets passed. So that's the budget process there.
And I would just like to interject quickly and say that the reason we asked Loretta to talk a little bit about this budget cycle is that this is what determines whether or not climate work or any of the other issues we care about gets funded. So right now we have the Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan passed at the county and in all 3 jurisdictions, but none of the jurisdictions are currently allocating the necessary funds to really implement that work in the timeline that's necessary. So it's important for us to understand, you know, when community input can happen so that we can ask for things like fund more staffing for the mitigation plan.
And apparently the county has half-time more staffing than it did in the previous time period, and may have hired that person, I'm not quite sure, to work on climate mitigation for the first time. And the last slide you know, is not readable by you, but it gives you the links to all of the other places and a little video. This video is done, someone earlier mentioned the Department of Commerce. Under state law, all the training and a lot of the information that counties and cities need in order to do their comprehensive plan is managed by the Department of Commerce. And so they put together these terrific little videos, and they're worth the 10 minutes and the 11 minutes to do. And future-wise, an organization that tries to make sure that we do the best planning that we can at the local level, put together a beginner's guide to the GMA. So that's there for you. So let's close out my slides and see, we're a little bit over time, but not too much. See if I have to do stop sharing, I guess. See if what kind of final questions you might have for the evening. And Robin.
Yes, I have a comment to Charlotte's point. I have been at least 2 meetings recently that they were talking about affordable housing, both in the Thurston County area, in the Sumner area, and it can be like super critical that somebody who cares about food resiliency and the environment try and get things like community gardens and food forests and green space attached to those affordable housing things, because then you're building in resiliency of the people. They can be growing their own food instead of having it to come from elsewhere. And then we're also building in that green space, and we're teaching people the importance of local food supply. The first meeting I went to was the military affairs, and then the second one was the Sumner Rotary, and I might be able to find notes and contacts if people want.
And other questions? How many of you would like to have, think that you would participate in another session if, not from me, but another session from our county staff and city staff to learn more about this coming update to the periodic update to the comprehensive plan. The hands up there, yeah, thumbs up. I think it's all part of learning that we haven't had the chance to do, and it's time for us to have the opportunity to do that.
Just jump in there.
Can I suggest, though, that when I have been to quote unquote trainings by these staff, they tend to just fill up the entire time with their own explanations, usually a PowerPoint, and there's no time to ask questions. There's no breaking into smaller groups. There's no, it's really, it's not how I think of training. It's more like a presentation. And if we're going to do this and attract more people and keep people interested in doing this kind of education of themselves, it's got to be a little bit different format, I think.
No kidding.
And Cindy and Dan, is that your hand up or is that a question? Hand up, I think. Okay, I appreciate that you all were here and stayed with me this evening. And I hope that you have a little bit more knowledge about why we're doing the amendments to the comprehensive plan, what the big project is, the update, periodic update of the comprehensive plan, and how that fits into all the rules and regulations that we operate on in a community. We're doing this in order to have a more livable community for everybody. So thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you so much, Loretta. Can we all just give Loretta some applause? Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. And tonight's meeting was recorded, so it will go up on TCAT's YouTube channel, and I will also send out Loretta's slides to everyone who registered for tonight's meeting. So you'll have access to all those links that she has in there, and you'll be able to refer back to that.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much, Loretta. Have a good night, everyone. All right, Loretta, I'm going to end the meeting for us all.